when we talk, and on my side, in the production side, One Health is always related to production, food, meat, eggs, and milk, and so forth. Now we're talking about animals. There we share the same space. We live day in, day out. There is a lot of connections and opportunities for exchange. So bottom line, it will be not only as a disease agent. Salmonella is a pathogen in humans, very frequent, is a pathogen for pets, maybe not as frequent as in humans, but there is a connection as a One Health umbrella in that.
Welcome to the Pet Food Science Podcast, powered by Wisenetics, your trusted source for the cutting-edge science and insights driving the global pet food industry forward. Whether you're a nutritionist, product developer, marketer, veterinarian, or decision maker in the pet food space, this podcast is your go-to for staying competitive and informed. From emerging research and regulatory shifts to ingredient innovation and sustainability trends, we cover what matters. I'm your host, Dr. Kate Shoveler. I'm a professor of companion animal nutrition at the University of Guelph. I have a background in comparative animal nutrition and 2 decades of experience working alongside industry partners. In today's episodes, we're going to explore the risks of Salmonella with Dr. Marcos Rostagno from Nutreco Selko USA, where he is the Director of Technical Services and Innovation. Welcome, Marcos.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. Thank you for having me. I look forward to this chat. Let's get going.
Me too. I love talking about the risks of food in general. But maybe to get us started, if you wouldn't mind telling the listeners a little bit about your professional journey.
Sure. It is indeed a journey. I started in one area, shifted careers multiple times in countries. So that is usually people get interested in that. So I'm a veterinarian. Most of my focus, or if not almost all, has been in production animals, particularly poultry and swine. I started my career in Brazil, Latin America, then was focusing on academia, was targeted and decided I was going to be a professor, then shifted to a scientist, full-time scientist in the U.S. for the USDA, then Purdue as a faculty, then shifted to industry, did a lot of consulting in between, doing a lot of field work around the globe, then decided to slow down and focus more in the U.S., still doing some field work, but then is slowly shifting into management. And today I lead multi-species, ruminants, monogastrics, tech team, and innovation for North America. So in a nutshell, it try to give you a sense of my journey in different areas, different countries.
Well, you gave a very rapid introduction to a very storied journey. It's quite impressive how many places globally that you've lived and worked. And so I find that very inspirational. But let's get into the meat of today's podcast, which is the risk of Salmonella. And thank you for laughing at that unintended pun with the meat of today.
At Trow Nutrition, we blend our passion for customer success with our love for pet nutrition, bringing together the art and science of nutrition, ingredients, and blending. We're here to dream with you and help you create standout products. We're here to deliver for you with dry ingredient, premixes, base blends, and specialty blends. And we're 100% dedicated to you with a complete focus on pet nutrition. See what Trow can do for you at trownutritionpets.com.
So let's start with the basics. Why is Salmonella so important for us to consider? And if you wouldn't mind commenting maybe on both humans and pets, because we largely share a space these days.
Yeah, so Salmonella is first and foremost important, or attracts a lot of interest because of the human side, of course. It's a very important, probably one of the most common, if not the most common, foodborne disease in humans. It's not just foodborne. We're going to get into that, I assume, on this discussion. But in humans, it's a big issue, very frequent, very common. We all hear about salmonella. Even if you're not a technical person, you will hear about food safety issues with salmonella. My area of expertise in poultry is strongly connected to salmonella. So that's why I became some sort of expert in that area, because it's a need in my space. And I did a lot of research on that. So from the human side, that's very important. From the companion animal or pet side, is not so much. It is a pathogen. It can cause disease in companion animals, but it's not so much as frequent as it is in humans. However, because we increasingly interact with pets, we live together, we share the same space, we do a lot of things together, we spend years in our lives with them, then it becomes not only a potential pet issue, but also a One Health concept, right? So when we talk on my side, in the production side, One Health is always related to production, food, meat, eggs, and milk, and so forth. Now we're talking about animals there. We share the same space. We live day in, day out. There is a lot of connections and opportunities for exchange. So bottom line, it will be not only as a disease agent. Salmonella is a pathogen in humans, very frequent, is a pathogen for pets, maybe not as frequent as in humans, but there is a connection as a One Health umbrella in that.
So just for clarification on my part, is it less common in dogs and cats because they're less susceptible to salmonella contamination, or because they're exposed to salmonella contamination less than humans are?
I think it's more in terms of their susceptibility, but primarily because, remember, when you talk about the digestive system or GI tract of humans and pets, there are some differences. There are some key differences in those that are connected to susceptibility or increased predisposition, whatever term you wanna go. I don't want to get too much into the weeds, into infectious disease and pathogenesis, but some basic things are, for instance, the GI tract of dogs and cats, it's shorter than in humans. So the passage of their digesta is much faster, right? They tend to have a much higher capacity of acidification of the stomach, which is a very important barrier for pathogens to make it into the intestinal tract, right? They are exposed heavily, way heavier than in humans, to microbes all through their lives, right? We are bringing them to our reality. That's a topic for another discussion. But even in our day-to-day lives with pets, they are exposed to higher loads of microorganism, potential pathogens that's early on in their lives than we are. We are increasingly getting hygienic, clean, so our immune system starts missing those opportunities to develop resistance or to adapt. Dogs and cats are not so much, and so they become more resistant to that. And of course, there is the whole component of sources, right? In our case, our important source comes through food. It's one very important way of being infected with salmonella, and how we handle our food. That has a component in pets that we can touch afterwards, but just trying to give you some sense that yes, there are some differences. However, if you look at the most susceptible parts of the population in both humans and companion animals, they overlap, which are always the young, right? Microbiome, intestinal tract is still being developed, as well as the elderly or immune compromised. And so those two types of slices, let's say, of the populations are common for both. These are the groups, both in humans and pets, are more susceptible to salmonella.
Yeah, just out of interest's sake, does that also mean that obese pets are more susceptible to the risk of salmonella infection because of the load of inflammation that they have?
You have inflammation, you have distortions of, I like to use the term of distortions than dysbiosis, because not necessarily is just reduction. I like the distortion because it's more related to homeostasis. When we think in terms of microbiome and immune system and physiology, which is frequently kind of left out of this equation, but we have to think in all these three components. Example, as I mentioned, shorter digestive system in pets, faster transit of digestion. All these have effects in mucus production and acidification, opportunities, and so forth. But yes, the obesity, we're still trying to unravel that mystery, right? But yeah, but it is well known, at least in many years, for many years, and I've done some research on that in my past lives, where inflammation promotes what they call bloom of enterobacteria, which includes E. coli, Salmonella, and things like that, because of the conditions they create in the digestive system, particularly in the small intestine. So yes, obesity, if we connect the dots, it makes sense to increase the predisposition or the risk for enteric pathogens, and in that case, Salmonella, in both pets and humans.
Interesting. So now, one thing, of course, that we're very interested in on the podcast and the listeners is obviously the driver is the food that we feed these pets. So can you start to talk a little bit about the aspects of how food, or in your realm, I know that your ag animal as well, feed is important for salmonella risk, and then maybe also break it down by the constituents that come in the feed as well and their relative risks?
Yes, different ingredients or different constituents of a diet will carry different risks, right? But remember, risks are always relative. Not only they vary in terms of the source, but also how we manage it. Right, so you may have a source with a lower risk, but if it's not managed properly or the exposure's frequency is higher, you change that dynamic. Don't want to get again into the basics of risk assessments and management, but yeah, for a long time, even we experienced this in production animals. For a long time, I remember back in my early days in career and learning about Salmonella, it was all about animal ingredients, right? All fish meal, meat meal, protein, animal protein, anything you brought from animals was a big concern in Salmonella. Well, the industry shifted over time, and nowadays, for instance, we use less and less animal sources, materials, or ingredients in our feed. However, Salmonella is still there, right? We continue to talk in Salmonella. Decades ago, we started decades ago. Decades later, we're still talking about Salmonella, and we are using, wait a minute, vegetable ingredients, right? You can all talk about in companion animals is no different than in production animals. All veggie diets, it's all vegetables, all no animal included, and so forth, or byproducts, co-products, soup products, whatever you want to call it. However, doing a lot of this work on risk assessments in production animals, it's well known that some of these vegetable ingredients, particularly grains, they do carry risks of contamination of Salmonella. And why? Not because they are a risk on themselves. It's all Salmonella. It's all about process. It's all about where does it come from, how it's handled, how it's stored, how it's used in production of the feed or food, how in the end, how is that feed or food delivered to whatever chain you have along, which could be all the way from the feed mill to the feeder of the animal at the farm, or from the plant that manufactures the food for the pet, all the way to the shelves of the store, and then to the household, and to the end, to the small bowl you give to your animal. How you handle it. There's so many opportunities to contaminate, recontaminate, cross-contaminate, that the risk exists no matter what ingredient you're using, right? So how you handle, how you maintain the ingredients, the process, and the food or feed in the end, all these matters for Salmonella. And why? Because Salmonella is very ubiquitous. It's everywhere. Everywhere. It's very, because you carry Salmonella in the intestinal tract doesn't mean, oh, I'm infected, I'm going to get sick. Likely, if we start looking at the population, the majority of the population carry Salmonella. But remember, what people don't understand, when you talk Salmonella, you're not talking about one pathogen. You're talking about a huge population of pathogens. Just to give you a sense, Salmonella is a genus name that we give to this group, but there are species, subspecies, serovirus, serotypes, and you go on and on and on. When we get to the final serovirus, serotypes, different groups call it different ways, but the final classification, you were talking, last time I checked, you're talking over 2,600 different types of Salmonella serotypes. Not all of them are the same. Not all of them survive under the same environmental conditions. Not all of them are pathogenically similar. Not all of them target the same hosts, and so on and so forth. You can go. So that gives you a sense of this big puzzle. I joke, it's a 3D puzzle that you have to play with. And maybe that's why we're still dealing with Salmonella, which is still top of mind in whatever industry. If you link it to food, feed, animals, you will talk about Salmonella no matter what.
Absolutely. Well, you talked about intact ingredients, animal and plant-based ingredients. Could you also maybe comment on grains versus pulses? I would be interested in whether those have similar risks, and I'm wondering if how we choose to cultivate those ingredients have something, or those crops have something to do with this. And then also, of course, Nutreco Selko is well known for micro ingredient or vitamin mineral premixes. If you could comment on those as well, I'd be curious.
Yes, different ingredients, no matter, as I said, what they are, but particularly the I will call the large scale ingredients, the grains and things like that. The conditions, not necessarily how they were grown or harvested, it's what drives it. It's how it is conserved, how it is stored, how it is handled throughout the process, distributed. Remember, these are large scales. They're going to be in large warehouses. There are opportunities, even if they're not contaminated or decontaminated, you have risk of recontaminations, right? Birds, pests, people, equipment, and you keep going, right? So all that is very important. So then it takes you to the micro ingredients. When you're talking micro ingredients, the scale you deal with them is much smaller, much easier to control. So what I tell people is, remember I mentioned, is not just the ingredients and define the food, the feed. It's the whole process, right? How you control the process. What's your intervention point to use chemicals, organic acids, whatever it is, or in some countries it's allowed, others not, formaldehydes and things like that, or you use thermal treatment, right? Pelletization, temperature, humidity, pasteurization, depending on the type of food or feed you're producing. You have all these tools. So at the same time, I've been in as I mentioned at the beginning, I did a lot of risk assessments in feed mills, and they would say, no, we pellet everything, so we're safe. I say, wait a minute, how is your pelleting process going. Pelleting is not just that time point, how quickly you get to that temperature, that humidity. Do you maintain it? The batches that come through so you have all these things. And then is the other part, which is contaminations. We are not talking about, people don't understand this either. Salmonella, there is a say that I use for many, many years is absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, right? Because you don't detect it, you can't see it, it doesn't mean it's not there, right? Because our analytical methods, our detection methods, they have limitations. Our sampling methodologies have limitations. You're never sampling 100%. Right? It's a sample. There's always a probability or risk that you're not going to detect. And we're dealing with contamination. So these are very, very small amounts. There's another trick. They are not homogeneously distributed in batches. When you talk on whatever ingredient, it's clusters. And so in your sampling, are you hitting those clusters or not? You may be missing those clusters depending on how you design your sample. So all these to say that, yes, how you handle is what really drives this. Largest macro ingredients, larger scales macro ingredients, risks of opportunities for contaminations are much higher than micro ingredients. They are under much more control conditions, easier to maintain. And we see this in our plants and our processes. These are not only ours, our customers and so forth. Those are much more controlled. Those are much easier to reduce the risk. I like to use so much that term of risk. It's never zero. You're trying to manage. You're trying to keep it as low as possible. Risks are probabilities. Life is probability, right? So you're managing that probability, trying to keep that probability as low as possible. Zero in a perfect world will be zero risk. That doesn't exist.
Yeah, don't we all wish? Very, very interesting. So that, first of all, really speaks to robust food safety programs and HACCP programs as an example through everything. And so it really means that there has to be a lot of business to business collaboration from the ingredient suppliers to the pet food manufacturers to ensure that risk is mitigated. Yes.
Yeah. So you need to really have that relationship, and it's the same no matter which industry you're working on in terms of risks and salmonella. There is a mutual interest there to minimize that risk. And you cannot, since any process or system, it's primarily composed by multiple links in that chain, right? If one breaks, you compromise the next one. If you're not doing a good risk management in one link, you are putting pressure in the following link, you are increasing the risk in the other. So it's all what I call, again, we're trying not to get too much technical, conditional probability, right? If I do this in this link, what is my probability in the follow-up link that depends on this link? That's all linked to each other. That's why we call it a chain. That's why it's a process, right? So yes, customers, it's important for them to know what is your, and again, what I mentioned, the 3D puzzle is not just, oh, I have this process, it's there, go there, checklist, check, is done, right? It's having this understanding, as I was just describing, sampling limitations. How should I design based on my data? That's where all this technology, again, is way over my head. Now we have AI and all these things. It's not a one-time done, right? It has to be adjusted. I'm analyzing, I'm testing ingredients as they come through, or if I'm a customer, I'm also most likely testing or checking my product or whatever is coming because I have a brand to protect. In pet food particularly, I have a brand to protect. I have to make sure that I have no risk because for me, my brand is extremely important. If a product we have a break and we have animals getting sick, and all of a sudden vets start collecting samples and they trace it back to your product, you're in big trouble. right? It's gonna, and especially when you're talking pets, I think it's even worse than in production animals. But in pets, it's all about the brand, the communities, as the owners talking to each other. You can quickly get out of the market. So the people in the both the suppliers as well as customers, they need to have that understanding that is a dynamic system, a dynamic process. Things will change based on ingredients, or how they're handled in your processes and in your risks and so forth. And you have to constantly be adjusting. You have to constantly be tracking and monitoring, knowing what you're looking at. Like if I'm looking at, people tend to look at 2 time points. I get X prevalence here or incidence here. Oh, X plus Y in the, oh, my problem is going up. Wait a minute. What is your control? This is not a rocket, right? This is not engineering. There is a certain level of variation, risk probability. Is your risk getting out of control? Something happened or not? You're still within that frame. Knowing how to look at data is also very important.
Yeah, you need to monitor your process all the way to market. But then, as you very correctly stated too, there is no other market like the pet food market. And because it is a consumer good, you are right. A brand can be at very high risk. So your consumer hotline, you monitoring social media is in fact data that you should be tracking very, very closely to monitor that risk. Because once it leaves the pet food store too, we don't know how it's handled, and that also poses a risk to both the human and the pet that I think we don't talk to the pet owner enough about. Maybe that is really important. So I am really glad as well that pet food is coming under greater scrutiny across the board because it is in our houses, and I'm pretty sure that there's people who eat pet food as well. So just to throw that in there. So maybe to end it off, what do you think the most relevant trends related to salmonella risk are today? And what is your advice for addressing those trends?
We live in a very, very complicated world, right? Where everyone nowadays, as long as they have a channel, they become experts, right? Whatever they say becomes reality, becomes the truth. And that's a problem. So, for instance, I see a big problem. In our case, let's start with the human side. The human side, because it links, and I'll take you to the pet side. In the human side, we have all these crazy new diets coming up, right? And people handling food in different ways. A big chunk of foodborne illnesses is due to how you handle and what you eat, right? So all this is very important. Where you eat, how you handle what you eat, all these things are very important. And so without having that basic understanding of risk, microbial populations, microbiology, environmental microbiology, a lot of people make mistakes, believing that they're doing the best for their health, but in reality, they're increasing their risk, right? That because they read, heard, saw the new trend, but they follow, right? And that's a big problem. So you do everything you can. The industry invests a lot of money controlling everything. But as I said, there is no such thing as risk zero, right? Or no risk. There's always a risk. And depending on how you handle that leads to the pet side, which is also, as you were just describing, and I mentioned, it's becoming more and more similar to the consumer market, general consumer market, right? Heavily influenced by trends, influencers, social media, groups, discussions, so on and so forth. Well, for instance, one thing that I can pinpoint, just a quick example and a very specific example to your audience. I hear about this and I cringe every time I hear, oh, raw food, right? Or I've seen even raw water being offered. I'm like, what is that, right? But you see this thing and they catch, right? And people start following that. Well, if you start eating raw food, or you start feeding your pet raw food, guess what? That probability of that risk skyrockets, right? What is one of the main sources of foodborne illnesses, and that FDA, CDC, doctors in general, public health authorities try to educate homeowners or cooks? Wash your utensils, don't cross contaminate. And all of a sudden, you're doing the same for your pet, right? You're giving them raw food and your kitchen becomes contaminated and so forth. Keep in mind, even if you don't get sick, but your pet gets contaminated, it becomes a risk for you later on, right? There's a lot of studies showing there is a lot of exchange of microbiome populations between individuals in the same household, but also between pets and individuals that live in the same household. So these type of trends that they don't have any understanding, there's no logic behind, it's just a trend. They may carry risks that people that don't have any of this technical understanding, they fall for it, and they then afterwards they don't know why something happened, right? That is very, very important, very common, and sometimes that bothers me a lot.
Yeah, very understandably, very understandably. Well, thank you very much for sharing your expertise with us today. This was really illuminating. I hope that you will consider to come back to talk about other risks associated with feed. But I do have a couple of personal questions to end off.
Mm-hmm.
It's time for our famous three.
The first one is, what foodborne safety aspect concerns you personally the most for dogs and cats?
I think the one that I just mentioned is the one that being a veterinarian, a pet owner, when I hear other people's, I have to sometimes control and try to educate individuals or colleagues or friends, family friends that, oh, we've seen this new trend, and whoa, and in back of my mind, all those risks are coming, and I'm already thinking about this. So that to me, it's something that it's something very important that I watch and I deal with on a daily basis, even in my home, right? I have a dog, I have a cat. Well, my wife, I drive her crazy in the kitchen, right? Remember, I'm a veterinarian, I'm a microbiologist, and I'm a food safety expert. So she's like, I don't want to be in the kitchen with you. You drive me crazy. So I try to be very careful what we feed our animals, what we handle in the kitchen, how we handle things in the kitchen, because it's important for our safety, for our pet's safety, how we do that. I think one way of minimizing this is being very conscious, very aware of the risks of following people that are not experts. They don't have any technical background. It's we have to understand there is always some interest behind. There is a business running behind. So be very careful. Stop and think. Does it make sense? Does it not? Critical thinking, it's a increasingly rare commodity nowadays.
Absolutely. So I did have the next question was, what concerns you the most personally for food safety risk for humans? But I have a feeling it's the same thing as the food safety risk for dogs and cats.
Yes, I think so. But in the human side, it's a little bit more complicated in terms of it's not just, when you talk food safety, it's not just pathogens. There's a whole other component that I worked for a long time, and I think it's it's not an immediate risk, but people don't understand the long-term consequences, which is when you're dealing with all these microbial risks, right? You're not just dealing with pathogens. You're dealing with everything these microorganisms, either pathogens, commensals, and so forth, even if they're not making you sick, they're carrying a lot of other risks with them. And one key example is antibiotic resistance, right? And it's not just food safety. Antibiotic resistance is way more than food safety. I think the frame for that has been a little bit limited, I'll say, over the years. And that's why we still deal with this and we still have to think long term. Topic for another discussion. We can go on for hours on that. But when I think on this, is not just Salmonella or maybe other pathogens. Campylobacter is another one important, right, in the human side. So it's not just, we have to stop just thinking on the immediate risk. Pathogen disease, wait a minute, commensals, microbiomes, microorganisms, we are much more interconnected than we believe or we understand. So we need to start paying a little bit more attention to those things.
Excellent. And last but not least, my question for everyone is, which do you prefer, dogs or cats?
As I mentioned, I have both. And so I'll say I'll play a politically correct answer because they're different, right? I love dogs because they're much more interactive. I love the interactivity. It's fun to have a dog around that. But I love cats because they're way more independent, much easier to care for. And I'm fascinated for their independence. They are very different animals, very different characteristics. So depending on how you look, you may have a preference. I said, I like both because of different reasons.
Yeah, fair. I like all animals. Well, I think almost all. Well, thank you once again, Marcos. This was great, and I really appreciate your expertise today.
I appreciate the opportunity. I know this is a very broad topic, and within this, we touch on many other potential complex topics that are related. Always happy to try and contribute somehow to your audience. Anything needs to be further discussed. I'm always open to having these type of conversations. I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Well, that concludes another episode of the Pet Food Science Podcast, presented by Wisenetics. Thank you for joining us today. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast to stay updated on future episodes. And if you enjoyed today's podcast, please leave us a review, as your feedback is invaluable. Until next time, this is Kate Shoveler from the Pet Food Science Podcast signing off.